Our gathering today, though, is to celebrate the research of the entire Lynch School faculty. We have a slice of that in our faculty research activities book that's compiled for today, and as well as to highlight a theme of research each year that's a part of the mission of the Lynch School. And this year's theme is enhancing educational success for economically disadvantaged children and young adults, and highlights the cutting-edge research being done in the Lynch School with an eye to policy and practice. The issue of economic disparities is very much in our social consciousness, reflected in election year politics, and even focused on in the lead article of this month's Chronicle of Higher Education, which I'm very also proud to say two of our faculty members, David Bluestein, and our third presenter today, Karen Arnold, are featured. That's right. So if you'll indulge me to read just a little bit, people who advise low-income, so from the article, people who advise low-income students or study their paths to careers may see a familiar pattern here. Students with limited horizons who can't bridge the gap between their aspirations and reality. In that gap lie financial insecurity, family pressures, bad schools, a fear of debt, a lack of social or cultural capital, discrimination. Those factors often push poor students to aim low, to go for what seems like a sure thing rather than take risks pursuing an eminent occupation. Some might regard that pattern with a shrug. After all, few people work in dream jobs, and many muddle through, college or not, to jobs that simply pay the bills. But the fact is that the affluent, generally white people, are more likely to reach aspirational careers than our low-income, often minority people, despite their talents, intelligence, or ambitions. And so the positions that set policy, influence public opinion, and guide the business world continue to be held by those who have money, connections, or both. For today's presentations, we're happy to pick up these issues and are very pleased to highlight the work of our faculty across 4 departments. Our first presentation will be from Associate Professor Eric Deering, titled Can Parents Support of Early Math Learning Improve Low-Income Children's Achievement in Lasting Ways? Our second presentation will be from Associate Professor Mariela Paez, entitled Language and Literacy Development in Dual Language Learners, Building Homeschool Connections. Our third presentation will be from Associate Professor Karen Arnold, entitled Virtual Interventions for College Access. And to conclude our program, WASI Chair of Education and Public Policy, Professor Henry Brown, will discuss the papers. Following Henry, we will have time for questions for our panelists. With no further ado, Dr. Eric Deering.
I think the mic is going to work fine for me. If it doesn't, I can put on the lapel mic as well. So, and thank you to Jim, who organized all of this, among the many other things that he has organized. And my co-presenters, and I'm sure will be very enlightening comments from Henry as well. Thank you, and for all of you for being here, of course. So, yes, as Jim indicated, and as indicated by the title of my talk, I want to share with you some of the work that I'm doing on parent support of early math learning, and particularly among low-income children, and the implications that that may have for their long-term achievement. This work comes from 2 closely related projects that are both funded by the Heising-Simons Foundation. One of them is a large network project. You see my colleagues from around the country that are listed there. The second one is a project working with Beth Casey, who is my co-PI in the project, and I'll spend the majority of the time focused on that project, but just to let you know, I'm kind of mixing and matching here, so I'm kind of conflating work from 2 projects and going back and forth, but hopefully seamlessly, so you don't even know. But I do want to acknowledge Beth, of course, and then our fabulous postdoc, Caitlin Lombardi, 2 great PhD students, Wanya and Dana, and then we've also had this amazing team of master's students and undergraduates, that Audrey has funded, through the Lynch School as well. And so it's been it truly has been a Lynch School team effort, and it's been a wonderful experience. So, and here we go, into 12 minutes, Jim, it's going to happen. Why early math, and why is Eric doing early math? So if you looked at my CV even 4 years ago, you probably would find no hint of early math on it. I'm interested in parent support, generally speaking, particularly among low-income children, and engagement in school, especially during the early years. But I am, to be perfectly transparent, riding a new wave, and that wave was initiated by work done by Alita Lasky and some of her colleagues and others around the country that have been studying children's development of early math skills and strategies. And when that work met a couple other lines of research, one of them being continuing evidence that there are very large disparities before school starts between low-income and high-income children in terms of math skills. So disparities that really dwarf other achievement gaps that we look at. And then another line of work, that those disparities in math skills are strongly predictive of long-term life chance outcomes. So not only their reading and math achievement, and in fact, some evidence that their early math skills are a better predictor of later reading achievement than the early reading skills are, but also predictive of their children's odds of graduating from high school and their earnings in adulthood. And so if you're interested in poverty and in disparities, it seems like I should also be, if I'm interested, I should say, then I should be interested in early math. And so over the last 4 years, I've really been on this kind of steep learning curve. But if you ask me any tricky early math questions, I'll turn around and say, Beth, Alita, could you? So just to make that clear. But the questions that I'm really interested in here is it possible, given that these very large disparities emerge before children get to kindergarten, that parent support might play a role in explaining what's happening in a lasting way? And so the graph I'm showing you here is each of the blue dots is a district in Massachusetts, and this is just the public data that you can get off the DOE site, and that just graphed here the percentage who are low income in the district by the percentage who graduate in 4 years. And what you should first of all notice is just the beauty of the way the data sit around that line. Beauty in quotes, right? Because this is a terrible correlation. But we don't get anything else like this in terms of correlational data in education or the social sciences more generally. But for every 2 percentage points you increase in percent of kids low income, you get a 1 percentage decrease in the odds of graduating in 4 years. So that, if you have no kids who are low income in your district, you're pretty much 100% likely. If you have 50% or if you have 100% low income, you have about a 50% chance of graduating in 4 years. And I'm interested in, is it possible that before children are even starting school, that some of this parental support around early math skills explains part of the pattern that you're seeing here, as well as what we see in the other later outcomes related to this? I'm not quite tall enough. It's hard to believe, but I'm not quite tall enough for this. I got it. So the second question that's related to this is then, can we help parents improve quantity and quality of early math learning support? And what I hope that question also evokes is, and in turn, reduce disparities long term, right? I mean, we're only asking that because we wonder if there could be a part of the role of reducing disparities. So, and I'm also just going to put a plug in here for a lot of the work that's happening, particularly in the network grant, but also that Beth and I are going to begin working on. Part of it is development work, where we are trying to develop new activities and adapt existing activities and toys and games that might promote better quality interactions between parents and children, as well as between early child care teachers and children. I'm going to focus on the research today, but there's been a real back and forth between this development and research, and that's been new for me and quite a bit of fun. And by the way, I just say that I put the shape sorter on there not because it is an ideal example of where we want to go, but maybe because it's a great example, an ideal example of ways that we might modify existing activities. So you might just think about that. I don't have time in 12 minutes to tell you what it is, but so the research though. Right now, as we're building towards intervention studies, we've been doing a lot of observational work. And some of this has been new data collection, and as I'm going to focus on today, some of it's been existing data that's older data, in fact. But just to give you a sense of what we're going for here, we have been presenting parents and children and child care teachers and children with basically a buffet of activities and just observing what happens. And so we're just sticking stuff in front of them and seeing what are they attracted to, what are they having fun with, what's stimulating math talk, what's not stimulating math talk, and math talk thinking about both number talk but also spatial talk as well. And so understanding what presents opportunities and when are those opportunities taken advantage of. And within that line of work, Beth and I have had this really fun opportunity to work with some existing data. Now, these data come from the NICHD study of early child care and youth development. And it's specifically from the Boston site of this study. So there were 10 sites around the country where data were collected. One of those sites was Boston. 140 children who were born in 1991 were recruited from local high schools, local hospitals here in the Boston area, and with their parents, and then they were followed up through age 15, so from birth to age 15. And a number and various types of assessments were done all along the way. So observational data was collected, achievement data was collected on homes, on schools, on childcare settings, on the children themselves. And as part of all of those data that were collected, one of the things they were doing was very consistently observing children and interactions with their parents. But this was back in 1993 and 94 and 95, and that wave, that math wave I described that I'm now trying to ride, wasn't here yet. And so they were focused on maternal sensitivity, and they were focused on language and literacy. So cognitive stimulation, but really very little to do with our parents supporting early math learning. So we've gone back and taken all of these videos of these kiddos with their parents and with their caregivers, with dads and with moms, and we're doing a new set of coding. And so this is an example. At 3 years, the children interacted with their mothers with a cash register and with Duplos. You know, Duplos are the giant Legos, right? And there's some reason to think that these activities, so playing with a cash register, which actually has number symbols on it, right? And also had some coins, and has lots of potential opportunities for number talk. And the Duplos, which are a lot like block building, might have some nice opportunities for spatial support as well. And so we went back and coded these interactions of mothers with their children, these 140 kiddos, and I say we, I mean the graduate students, right? This was a ton of work. It was, I mean, if you've ever developed a coding scheme from scratch, this is very time-consuming and intense, fun work. But let me just tell you in general, and without digging into the details here, but so we coded number talk, spatial language in quotes because we're also looking at gestures, but also spatial planning. And so primarily with the, you're going to see a lot of the number talk comes out with the cash register play, and the spatial stuff is focused primarily on the Duplo play. But just giving you some examples of the types of things, and just give you kind of a inside scoop of a paper that's under review right now, with Beth is first author on, and in which we have master students and PhD students that are co-authors on. But one of the big kind of stories in the early work was that labeling set sizes is a very strong predictor of later math achievement. Well, what is labeling set sizes? It's when, it's going to work, let's see if I do. So I'm gonna have it with me. But I got 3 pennies here, right? And so the parent says to little Jimmy, so little Jimmy, how many pennies do I have in my hand?
3.
That's right, little Jimmy, I've got 1, 2, 3, which means I have 3 pennies in the set, right? So the idea that last number is the set size feels intuitive at this point. It's not. Like, that's something we learn. It turns out that that's a really nice predictor. Whether parents were doing that, whether mothers were doing that, predicts achievement at 4.5 years, math achievement, predicts math achievement at 1st grade, at 3rd grade, and then I'm going to stop there because it gets to one of my punchlines. How am I doing on time? What? 2 minutes. Okay. All right, so I'm going to kind of fast forward here to this slide here, just tell you. One of the things, so what we are trying to figure out is that support I just told you about, does it help explain these effect sizes that you're seeing on the screen here? These are just Cohen's D's. It's basically telling we divided the 140 children into 3 groups, and we're at, so that a high-income group, middle-income group, and a low-income group, right? So just basically sample thirds here. And what you're seeing is the difference in math achievement scores on the Woodcock-Johnson Applied Problem Scale at 4.5 years. We could have done very similar at 1st grade as well as at 3rd grade, but this is just at 4.5 years. And it's about half a standard deviation difference between the high income and the low income, and about 40% of a standard deviation difference between the middle income and the low income. And the question we're asking is, all this stuff we've been coding in terms of parental support, how much of those differences can it help explain? right? So the high income kids are doing quite a bit better than the low income. The middle income are doing quite a bit better than low income. Can some of it be explained by the inputs that parents are giving that we've coded? And the answer to that is yes, some, and an important some of it, but there's still quite a bit left over. And so, and by the way, what the portions I'm showing you that are explained here, those portions don't grow if we add the quality of the child care environment, if we add general home stimulation, if we add general cognitive stimulation during the interaction, if we control for all the different SES variables like education, there's still, so we can explain about 25% of the high income versus low income gap, and we can explain about 29% of the middle income versus low income. But there's a lot still left there in terms of gap. So interesting potential, but still there's quite a bit we're wondering what's going on there. And before I go to my next kind of punchline slide here is 1 minute, yep. Part of what we're wondering is happening is, remember, we've got one time point, one interaction, right? And so how much can we really expect at age 3 would explain at 4.5 years? And so in some ways you say, wow, that's a lot from one time point, one interaction. And might we, as we begin to code more and more interactions, explain more and more? And so the last piece here is that it's also the case that over time, the implications of those 3-year-old supports fade. So with the numerical support, it has lasting implications through about 3rd grade. By 5th grade, it's dissipated. With the spatial support, it has through about 54 months. As early as 1st grade, it begins to fade. And what we think is maybe this isn't so surprising. So part of it might be about what's on the test at different ages. So it's possible these things will reemerge, right? So maybe in 8th grade, what your parents did at age 3 might matter again. But it also might be the case that what's really meaningful and what's really happening in higher income homes is sustained, developmentally adapted support over time, right? And so that's really where we're headed. And I think I'll just stop there. Yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you, Eric, for that wonderful presentation, and thank you, Karen, also for presenting in this panel. And thanks to Henry, who's going to be our discussant today. I feel honored to be presenting here with you. I wanted to talk a little bit about my work with dual language learners, children who speak a language other than English at home and maybe learning 2 languages, their home language and English. And this is an increasingly important population in our school system. I have a bunch of statistics that I was going to talk to you about. I think I'm just going to cut it short by telling you that there is a large number of DLLs that we see now in our school system, and a large number of these come from Spanish-speaking backgrounds. Nearly 1 in 4 children in the U.S. are from Latino, Hispanic origin, and out of this, 1 in 5 comes from a home where a language other than English is spoken. Something that is relevant to the theme of today, there are a large number, actually 2/3 of DLLs are growing up in low-income families and live in poverty. So I think this is something that is important to note. And it presents a challenge for us researchers that are trying to disentangle the effects of poverty and the effects of bilingualism. Because oftentimes when we study these populations, these 2 factors are really happening together. So that's been some of the work that I've been doing on the population that I've been studying. I'm concerned about the academic achievement gap for this population. If you look at the NAEP scores, Eric was just showing you some of these gaps in math, and I think what you see is that they exist not only in math but also in reading. So when you look at 4th grade and 8th grade reading achievement tests and math achievement tests, you see these gaps between white and Hispanics. And the gaps are larger for students from low SES backgrounds and for Hispanics who are ELLs. IES has these wonderful reports now where they're making a distinction between just Hispanics and then Hispanics who are classified as English language learners. And I think it's important to keep that distinction in mind. I'm in early childhood education, so when I look at this group of children in the early childhood years, we can often see already the gap in language and early literacy skills. And they start very early in preschool and they extend to later on the elementary grades. And sometimes they widen, so it's almost like a fan effect. One area in particular that I've been working and paying a lot of attention to is vocabulary development. It's so important. If achievement, reading achievement, if it were a lottery, I would put all my money in vocabulary. Vocabulary is so important. It's one of the best predictors of reading fluency, of comprehension, and also of performance in reading achievement tests, vocabulary. And it has been identified as a challenging area for bilingual students, DLL students. So this is one area I've been working on. And today I want to present some studies from my research program. During the past 15 years, 16 years, my academic and scholarly work has focused on advancing the knowledge base for young dual language learners, and I have two research objectives. I conducted developmental work to identify factors that influence the course of language and literacy development for this group of children. This is longitudinal work that I've done. And then I've also, more recently, started this line of intervention research where I'm developing research-based interventional strategies that can be useful for parents, teachers, and schools in enhancing language development. I'm going to present briefly a study in each of these lines of research, and I'm going to start with the early childhood study. This is a study that I developed with Patton Tabors, who was at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And as co-PIs, we designed and collected longitudinal data on a group of DLL bilingual children. We recruited them when they were in Head Start programs as 4-year-olds, and then we followed them through 2nd grade. This was a sub-project of a larger program of research at the Center for Applied Linguistics, and it was funded by NICHD. I'm not going to talk today about a comparative sample, but we did have a comparative sample in Puerto Rico that was from similar backgrounds, from low SES backgrounds, from Head Start classrooms, and we also follow them in Spanish from pre-K through 2nd grade. And one finding that I want to highlight today, because it really frames my intervention work, is the fact that we found great variability. Yes, not all young children, dual language learners, start with the same set of skills in preschool, and this variability, we found it throughout the early elementary grades. But on average, even with the variability, on average, students were performing better in the early literacy task than in the oral language tasks, in both English and Spanish. We assessed students in both languages throughout the early childhood years, and that was important. It was probably one of the first studies to look longitudinal at both English and Spanish during this period of time. And so what we find is that they do better in early literacy tasks, so they can identify letters and they start decoding, and they do much better in those tasks than in oral language, vocabulary, for example. When we look at vocabulary, what we see is this is the word reading task, and in the interest of some time, I'll just tell you that the English blue line, the English growth mean, and the monolingual reference line here, you see, share very parallel, similar trends in development, but the vocabulary does not. And let me tell you what is happening with the vocabulary growth. So this graph shows W scores from the time children were 4 all the way through 2nd grade when they were 8 years of age on average. And what you see is that their English vocabulary skills start low comparatively to the monolingual reference line. And even though the growth rates are higher than those of monolinguals, they don't catch up. So when we see them in the elementary grades, in 1st and 2nd grade, there is still that gap in vocabulary skills. And like I mentioned to you before, vocabulary is key in learning how to read and reading proficiency. So this is a major concern. And at the time that we were publishing these results, other researchers in California, in Florida, and Pennsylvania were publishing similar results with regards to the trends in vocabulary. And that was what propelled me really for the second study I want to share with you today, which is an intervention study. I thought, what if we could change the trajectories? What if we could bump up the vocabulary skills early on? Because we know the growth rate is there, right? So what if we can start them up at a higher level and they're continuing to grow? So that was the idea of the intervention study, to support the oral language skills early on, give them a little enhancement so that when they enter the learning to read process, they had those skills and they could achieve reading proficiency. And so I developed this intervention, also funded by NICHD, and it was a longitudinal study. It took 2 years to develop the intervention, and then we implemented it in the third year with a control study, but it took a long time, and I'm so happy that I did this work with master's students, doctoral students, undergraduate students here at Boston College. It was a great team effort. And so the innovative idea of the intervention was to make it a dual language intervention. So it had two components, a family component, which we conducted in Spanish, and we worked with Spanish-speaking Latino families so that they would read in their homes and present language and literacy activities that were culturally relevant to them. And then at the same time, we developed a school component that focused on working with teachers to enhance vocabulary teaching through read-alouds in the classroom. Theoretically, the components were linked because we were targeting the same skills, the same language and literacy skills. And then practically they were linked because we were using exactly the same books. We gave the books to the families as resources, and we modeled how to read with the children and how to target vocabulary at home. And those were exactly the same books that teachers were using in the classroom. We had monthly meetings with both teachers and parents. I wanted to show you some of the concepts that we covered with parents. The intervention program was organized around thematic units, and we had 4 units. And with parents, when we met in these monthly meetings, we really wanted to support their use of the home language and explain to them the benefits of supporting home language and how it transferred to English development. So we promoted reading and talking about books in the home language, and we modeled for them effective strategies for doing this with the resources that we were giving. This is an example of the type of materials we would share with parents. This is a monthly schedule where parents would get information about the books that the children were reading in school, and at the same time they could use the books in the home. So teachers followed the schedules and parents had the schedule. This was one of the units, and maybe you recognize some of these books, where the wall things are, Click Clack Moo, Abuela. These were the books that were being used in the classroom. In addition to those books, we also gave them other Spanish books because the parents increased their reading at home and they wanted additional resources. So each month they would get between 5 and 6 books to work at home. And then on a weekly basis, we collected reports on what they were doing at home, the activities that they engaged in, how many times they read the books, and the same thing we were doing with the teachers in the classroom. So we were meeting with them monthly, we were observing implementation, conducting fidelity measures of the intervention, and doing assessment of the children. We use standardized assessments, and we also develop our own assessments linked to the curriculum. I'm going to just give you a summary of the findings, but we were able to increase their vocabulary skills for this kindergarten sample, and we found significant gains in vocabulary for the children that were participating in the classroom component, but the biggest gains were for the children that participated in both the home plus the classroom condition. They had the largest gains. More importantly, I think one of the bigger lessons for me in this research is that parents eagerly seek support for the use of Spanish at home. They need professionals to affirm that the use of the home language is valuable and that they have a role in supporting language and literacy at home. And high levels of engagement with the intervention, we were able to increase the frequency of parent and child reading at home. And I think what the study showed was the potential for creating these partnerships with families and leveraging the knowledge of Spanish-speaking families in the interest of young children's development. We are continuing this work inspired by this model right now in Boston Public Schools, supporting the development of Home Links program, which is going to replace the kindergarten homework in all the Boston Public Schools. And they're translating the program into 5 different languages. So it's an extension. It's going to be in Chinese, in Portuguese, in Vietnamese, in Haitian Creole. It's really a great extension of the work. Right now we're in a pilot stage. We have 9 schools, and we aim to do a district-wide implementation next year. I'm also part of the early literacy time. Did you say time? Okay. So I'm part of the early literacy expert panel who's setting up an agenda for improving 3rd grade reading proficiency, and we're starting from birth. I continue doing work in early childhood studies. I have a great project with Megina Baker that relates to this research with dual language learners, looking at effective practices and policies. And just this week, I'm applying for a professional development grant with a team led by Patrick Proctor that would extend this work to dual language schools. So thank you. Some knowledge.
Thank you. Thanks, Mariela and Eric. Wonderful. And thank you for the opportunity to share my 2 current studies. Both are randomized controlled treatment trials of interventions to help low-income students enroll in higher education. So we've zoomed up the age ladder. Both are national studies done in collaboration with the College Board and with investigators across several universities and partners, organizational partners, delivering the interventions. In each case, I'm the PI, not for the overall study, but for the qualitative portion, which in these instances includes survey research. Along with many, many people, I've studied and contributed to what we know about access to higher education of low-income students. And since 2012, I've moved on, again, with many collaborators, to research on interventions intending to reduce these barriers. At this point, the goal is to find effective, scalable, affordable interventions to assist the tens of thousands of students who are trying to get into higher education and get into appropriate institutions for them. So today I can just give you the barest outline of this work. So please ask questions, follow up with me later. The problem. I thought, how can I do this really quickly? And I commissioned this slide from our wonderful media services people. This is the problem we're trying to solve. So this graphic shows results from the educational longitudinal study of students who were high school sophomores in 2002, followed until 2012. Of 100 potential members of the high school class of 2004, it shows how many reached each rung on the education ladder. The top income quartile is on your left, the bottom on your right. White are the people who didn't get through high school. Light gray are high school graduates who never entered college. Dark gray are students who enrolled in college but never graduated. And the bottom right corner, the figures in black are the ones still standing at the end, people who received a college degree by age 26. The top quartile, 58%. Not so great, actually. But the bottom quartile, 12%. So why is it that low-income students are earning college degrees at such a low rate? It isn't because they don't want to go to college. There are relatively few light gray outlines in this graphic. The reason is on the left side. Technically, it's a ball of wax. Academic preparation, expectations, information, money. Students need to aspire to go to college. They need to be academically ready to succeed. They need to know how to get to college, and they need to figure out how to pay for it. We took on the last 2 things, getting to college and figuring out how to pay for it. One more twist. Where they go. turns out that low-income, high-achieving students don't go to the most selective schools for which their credentials would make them admissible. They often don't even apply, and this phenomenon is called undermatching. Why is it a problem? Well, in addition to arguably better education, these are the colleges, the really top colleges, that have the most money for financial aid and for which you're most likely to graduate and become one of those black outlying figures. That's at the individual level. At the institutional level, the share of low-income students is not getting any bigger at the most selective colleges. Pell Grants go to the neediest, financially neediest students, usually in families with average incomes lower than $30,000 a year. So if you take a look at that bottom line, this isn't getting better. Boston College, you might wonder where we are, 13% Pell recipients in 2012, the last year we reported. So to recap, low-income students in general aren't getting through college, and the subgroup of high achievers isn't going to college at the right level of selectivity. Enter my studies. The first is called College Point, and in this one we're using virtual advising to provide personalized assistance to high school seniors who fall into this undermatching group. College Board is the source of this sample. Haley's and Hamies, high achieving low income and high achieving moderate income. Life's too short to say those things over and over. These students have high school GPAs and test scores that make them easily eligible for top schools, including, in many cases, Ivy League schools. Students are randomly assigned to control and treatment groups, and the treatment group receives an invitation to have a virtual advisor at one of the 4 nonprofit organizations on the far right. When they're matched with an advisor, they work with that person at a distance, over email, video conferencing, text messages, and sometimes over the phone. They never meet face-to-face. Last year was the pilot year, the class of 2015, the high school class of 2015. The first thing any treatment group needs is to be treated. And I had to start there because we found, and we're shocked, that only 18% of the 7,000 students we offered this intervention to last year accepted the invitation for free, professional, personalized, ongoing advising. So I set out to investigate this issue, and the question, why didn't they join? It's really a problem to cut through the clutter of both general and college-specific communication bombarding teenagers, or anybody for that matter. And high-achieving kids in particular are getting tons of college mail. I felt like I was doing marketing research. More specifically, students and their parents had worries about legitimacy, privacy, and whether this was a scam. Yeah, really, you're giving me free advising and you're the College Board? Internet scams are the stranger danger fear of this generation. Students didn't know what they didn't know. Some students assumed they were fine. I filled out the FAFSA. Ooh, there's a CSS profile for private schools. They thought they were all set. And then students were teenagers. For many, their attention, organization, and follow-through was less than stellar. And for this group in general, parents are sometimes not even aware of, much less micromanaging their college application process. So what did we find? Last year, again, for our 1,300 pilot year students, we found about a 15% difference in where they applied and were accepted. And that was pretty great. We hope to do better this year for a number of reasons. Across our data, we found that students and advisors found the virtual format advising comfortable, convenient, and useful. They particularly appreciated advising that was personalized to their situation and available outside of school hours. Those were 2 things very absent from what they were getting from their guidance counselors. Advisors were particularly important in helping students understand financial aid and in letting their students know that top schools really could be within their reach. And perhaps most important, we learned how to reach students, and the Bloomberg Foundation, which is funding this, spent big bucks and sent FedEx envelopes to all the families that were being invited this year. And we had very good take-up and now have 8,300 students in the class of 2016 in the intervention. So that's the College Point's very high level.
Wow.
DIMES. We are leaving the realm of undermatching and the high-achieving student. Digital Information Messaging for Educational Success, or DIMES, is funded by the Department of Ed, IES, and goes by DIMES. It involves middle-of-the-road students in terms of academic achievement. In this intervention, students receive and respond to text messages on their cell phone. These messages include both customized automated text messages and manually sent messages from an assigned advisor. And both kinds of messages often include embedded links for more information or directly to tools and places where they can carry out college application and financial aid tasks. Again, these are high school juniors and seniors. Why text messages? This comes from behavioral economics. Behavioral nudges, this is called. Kind of like when your Fitbit buzzes and then you're willing to walk more steps. The idea is to give nudges at critical junctures, and in this case in the form of short text messages. These messages are personalized with the student's name, the advisor name, maybe even a particular college they're interested in or their state's particular financial aid process. This is all cheap. It's scalable, and it's where teenagers live, on their mobile phones. So how do we find these folks? This sample was started at the level of schools. It came from a nationally representative group of high schools with at least 2/3 of their students receiving free or reduced lunch. And the treatment and control groups are each around 30,000 students. All of the students are from the high school class of 2016, and we began this last April as they took the PSATs. And that was the definition of college intending, that you took the PSAT and the students signed up for the intervention in the school at the point of taking that test. College Board is directly involved in this one, that's their program, and You Aspire is the advising organization delivering it, and the treatment group's getting one-on-one advising, all through text messages. They get one topic a month, a set of messages, topics like getting a fee waiver to take the SATs, choosing which colleges to apply to, writing a good essay, evaluating financial aid offers, deciding on a college where to enroll, so every month since April. And here you see a sample of a message back and forth. I'll give you a second to look at that. Note that the first message is an automated message, and it's a classic behavioral nudge to require some action step. If you say, have any questions, I'm here to tell you, because we've tested this, few will. If you say, as we did in October, do you know the deadline of at least one college to which you plan to apply, reply yes or no, they will reply, and you will learn that the majority of them do not. At which point an advisor will send back something like, oh, tell me one college you're interested in, here's a link to that admissions page. Note 3 other things about this slide. First of all, this student doesn't have a clue what financial aid is. In fact, we don't even use that word anymore. We talk about paying for college or affording college. Second, this student is figuring this out for him or herself. My kid doesn't know what a W-2 is, but she doesn't need to because I filled out her financial aid form. And the third, there are misspellings and alternative spellings here. Why is that important? Ask yourself this: how would I analyze 600,000 text messages? That's the data set that I'm getting sent to. Those are the data, qualitative data, 600,000 text messages. No way can we code that by hand with a qualitative data analysis program like HyperResearch or NVivo, right? Which brings me to where I want to end. The last thing I want to share. Very briefly, I have entered the world of text analytics and data mining. So
Big data come to
big data. We are analyzing these 600,000 and growing every month messages with 2 objectives: to capture and describe the content, not just count responses, and to test the association of topics with different independent variables like level of engagement in the intervention or in advising or the PSAT level, those kinds of things. So what you're seeing in front of you is a screen from an analysis done by a pair of programs, QDA Miner and WordStat, that's specifically for qualitative text analytics and data mining. I'm sorry to say these are not our data because I'm still on the learning curve and couldn't show you anything. These are from analysis of speeches in the 2008 presidential campaign. So the programs enable you to do word and phrase frequencies, both inductively and deductively, and to build these into topics through co-occurrences that result in dendrograms, or what I call word trees, which you'll see on your left. And through text mining, you can also then, once you've built these words, phrases, or topics, see the frequency with which some variable of interest is associated with them. In this case, which candidate used a particular word or topic in their speeches. That's the bar graph. You can look at the incidence of something over time. For instance, people were starting to talk in these text messages about financial aid way back in April, but now it's peaking, I assure you. And we're just starting to master this program with our own data. So if anybody's interested in this methodology, I'll be happy to share what I've learned once I've learned it. And about next October, we'll know whether interventions like these might really move the dial on the problem of socioeconomic inequality in college access. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around, and thank you to Jim and the staff for setting this up. And of course, the three speakers for very interesting and exciting work.
Henry, Mike.
Mike. Hi, Mike. Is this better? So, what is really going on? And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by repeating what you just heard, but try to give you sort of another perspective. And that is, as has been clear, we have very worrisome gaps in both academic attainment, educational attainment, and academic achievement at the young children level, young adult level, and millennials, for that matter. And these gaps occur by race, ethnicity, by SES, and obviously the combination of the two. We have lots of evidence for that. We also have learned today, and it's in the literature, that these gaps begin very early. They're substantial already by school entry. They do not particularly diminish over time. And most importantly, these gaps play out in differences in the long term, in the range of life outcomes, including work, family formation, civic engagement, and so on. And even more disturbingly, these gaps play out as differences in what is passed on to the next generation, leading to what appears to be increasing SES stratification in this country. I've had an interest in this actually for a long time. Before I even came to BC, my colleagues at ETS and I wrote a policy paper called America's Perfect Storm. There you see the storm right in front of you. And what we argued was that the combination of divergent skill distributions, which we mean by gaps, and demographic shifts in the country, combined with changing economic demands, was going to lead to some problems. And what we were arguing was that over time, if we did nothing about the gaps, what we would see would be a decline in human capital in this country. To give you an idea of what that means, if you look at the blue line, that is the distribution of literacy proficiency back in 1992 based on the National Adult Literacy Survey. The red line represents our projection for 2030 of literacy proficiency based on current literacy trends and gaps, combined with Census Bureau projections by age, gender, and race and ethnicity. And what you can see is that that red curve has a much longer, fatter left tail, a bad tail, than the blue curve. So what's happening is that we are going to have tens of millions of more people who are unable to deal with the literacy requirements of a modern globalized economy. And in particular, if you look at the boundary between level 2 and level 3, which is typically taken to be the boundary, you need to be at level 3 or above to sort of really be ready for something. You can see that in fact, in 2030, if we do nothing about this, we're going to have over 100 million people who are not ready. That is bad. Well, we sounded a warning. Not sure anybody heard it, but we sounded a warning. But what's really interesting and exciting for me to read the presentations and hear them today was that we're moving from warnings to interventions, and I think that's really, really key. And the presentations we've heard today document promising interventions to address some of those gaps. Of course, Eric and Mariela dealing with early gaps, and Karen dealing with gaps at the college transition level. There's a lot left in between, but okay. And what did they find? Well, Eric had some modest success, but documented some long-term decay. Mariela, again, modest success, not sure about decay. And Karen, again, some modest success. And I don't use modest as a pejorative term. This is what you can get. Unless you're Donald Trump, in which case, sky's the limit. And do I have a building for you? And again, I'm very happy to hear about these really exciting long-term research plans to continue this work. And the notion that we're going to be using, or they're going to be using, the evidence they collect to continually refine and improve what they're doing and hopefully make it more, even more effective. I think it's also interesting that a recent report from a combination of AEI and Brookings on opportunity, that report identified early childhood and post-secondary education as priorities for for increased public support. So you're right on the, you're right on where the money needs to be. Where the money is there, we'll see. So quickly, let me just review some of the lessons learned. One is, ideally, you want to plan your interventions and your evaluations together. You want to get it started right. Thoughtful design is a good thing, whether it's RCTs, QEDs, longitudinal observational studies. Give some thought to really playing that game, the methodological game, as well as you can. Understand the focal target populations and the context in which they live. And again from both Eric and Mariela, the idea that family involvement is critical, something that we in the academy have tended to ignore. Not sure why. The importance of long-term follow-up. Eric did that long-term follow-up, found some decay. In Head Start, they found, yes, there's a decay, but then 15 years later, we see good things. So, follow-up, you never know what you're going to find. Also, I think at least one of the speakers mentioned this, there's not enough focus on, there's too much of a focus on specific transitions. Disadvantaged children need support all the way through because the early barriers they face are succeeded by other barriers, right? So the game doesn't stop. And we as a society need to do something about moving that support level right across the developmental trajectory. So I can see some next steps coming up. One is focusing on multiple outcomes, not just the focal outcome, but what are some of the other things that may be coming out that might be positive or negative. Karen already mentioned this issue of cost effectiveness. Certainly those two interventions you talked about, relative to the usual way we think about advising, are very cost effective. And I think we're going to be increasingly under pressure to show not only that an intervention is effective, but that it's, quote, cost effective. Scaling up. I mean, this is a really big problem. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people. We need to figure out how to scale up and scale up in a way that preserves fidelity of the treatment. And to that, I think we're going to have to think about broadening our scope. So going beyond simply research partnerships, but partnerships with other entities who have an interest in making a difference in the long term. So with that, I'm going to offer this picture. Yeah, this is a coral reef. At least I'm told it's coral reef. And it's my model for how one thinks about, or one could think about scaling up. So the point is that if you swim along a coral reef, you recognize it's a coral reef. Wherever you are, yeah, that's a coral reef. But if you look closely at every point or every little location, it's different. It's colonized differently. So the coral reef is designed, intelligent design, creative design, evolutionary design. I'm not going to tell you which one I believe. But the point is that it's designed to support local adaptation. And I think as we think about scaling up powerful interventions, where we really believe there's a core to that intervention, we need to think about how to design that implementation to allow for local adaptation, but retaining the core of that intervention so that we don't lose the effectiveness that we find in our more academic studies. That's the big challenge, as I see it, in social science engineering for the next 2 decades. Thank you very much.
we have a little bit of time for some questions. The panelists really wanted to kind of like be a part of the audience here, so I don't want to like strong arm them to the front, but oh, look at that, they're so helpful. So we have, and I think Henry's sitting, I don't know, but questions for our panelists? Yes.
I was wondering, Eric, when you, is it not on?
Yes,
Okay.
It's closer. No.
You mentioned looking at the parent component, and then when you added other factors that didn't add to the variance explained. I was wondering if you looked also at some of those factors to see whether then the parenting added. So I guess my question has to do with whether or not the parenting explanation in the math problem was a proxy for other aspects of SES, and if you entered that first, whether or not the parenting would still kind of add to the variance. Because you could say, well, all we really need to do is to teach parents to do this, and it will, but would that make the difference?
So I mean, those are, I mean, it's the right kind of question you're asking, of course, because those are not intervention data, right? Those are correlational data. You know, the beauty of those correlational data is that we have such a wide collection of potential covariates, and so what you saw is after adjusting for all the usual suspects in terms of confounds, right? So thinking about all the other elements of SES, so the income gap I'm showing you is after adjusting for parent education, right? So you're only seeing the pure income gap. And then that which is explained by parenting is only showing you what's uniquely explained by parenting. And the parenting that we measure, we've got several other parenting variables in there as well. And so if you know, so we might think, in fact, you know, something like general level of cognitive stimulation, general level of parenting stress and the ways that that's displayed in the home, the general quality of the home environment, all of those things, the child care environment, the parents' IQ, so their verbal IQ is in there. We've included a ton of different covariates. Does that mean that we have a causal effect there? We don't know yet. That's, you know, we're trying to build to the intervention and trying to find places where it looks like there's some leverage points, and this so far looks like there is. But I think with the modesty that Henry's talking about, we're not gonna, everybody in BPS is not gonna graduate high school if we, you know, start our intervention next year, right? I mean, that's, yeah, it's the right question to ask.
Thank you.
I know she paid for this mic, but it's the New Hampshire leftover.
Other questions?
Yes.
Marina, I was wondering whether you have thought that a factor valuable in your intervention is that the content of what was happening in the family and in the school are parallel. Because when bilingual children's vocabulary is evaluated in each language separately, it's not fair because their knowledge is the addition of both languages. And so that each language separate, where they have experiences in different contexts, vocabulary is going to be different if you just compare it with a monolingual.
Definitely.
But when you have both languages providing equal context, whether that makes the development even stronger.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll say a few words about that. A very important point. In fact, I think one of the key factors in the intervention, why parents were engaged, was because the intervention was linked to the school. So first, parents saw the connection between what students were learning in the classroom and then what they were doing at home. Oftentimes, we tell parents that they can help their students at home, but we don't tell them how, and they don't see a connection to what students are doing in the classrooms. So the connection was important first because it engaged parents with the intervention, but then second, because what we were trying to do is maximize exposure to these words that are key. We selected tier 2 level words, and we had tier 1 level words during the intervention. These are words that have a lot of potential for instruction, that are going to be important for students to know, and oftentimes they're not words that you find in the home. You had to use the books and the activities to get at those words. And you know, when we first designed the study, Catherine Snow was one of the expert consultants, and she called it forced transfer. And I've come to, at first I disagreed with her, but then I've come to agree with her terminology. In fact, we were kind of forcing that transfer from Spanish to English by allowing parents to work on the same concepts, and that the children were going to then hear in English in the school. Really important, I think, that connection. The work that we're doing with BPS now has at its core the idea, but talk about taking things to scale. I think there are a lot of challenges with scaling up. I believe that still the main purpose of the intervention is still at the core of my work with BPS and the extension, but there are a lot of things that are very different. For example, they're not doing the monthly workshop with parents, and that I think is going to have a major impact. You can't just tell parents, okay, do this, and not offer support or scaffold it. So I think that's a major element of the scaling up. We need to figure that out, but we'll get to those issues in the pilot. I'm hopeful that with the pilot we can refine it and then have a better program next year.
And you should stress that.
Yes, for sure.
Other questions? Yes.
This is for Karen. I was just wondering if this pretty neat intervention may have also, some value when it comes to retention, because some people have pointed out that even though you can increase access to education, one of the main problems is for these students to remain in colleges. And so I'm just wondering if there is a piece in this intervention, perhaps not directly as part of it, but if there is something that you're going to, or if you're aware that something else is going to be happening along those lines.
With these particular studies, we are in fact going through the end of the first semester of college in the Bloomberg-funded virtual advising study. The research shows that most students make their decision to drop out in the first 6 weeks of college, whether or not they remain for the freshman year. So the transition into college is really important, and it looks like that's going to happen. And then the team I'm working with, the idea would be to then continue these behavioral nudges through other interventions across the college years, because as you rightly said, our model, to quote Phil Alpach, we let everybody in the door and then they fall out the windows. Even if the top income group having entered college still only graduates at 58%, and our national attrition rate of college entry is about 45%, that's pretty terrible.
My question is related to Nelson's, a little bit back in the developmental trajectory though. So it has to do with retention, and this is for the future, not something you're working on. So you're talking about information and access, but what about sort of earlier in those low-income, low-resource youth who don't have the readiness to succeed? So it kind of builds before they can even hope to even succeed in college. They go with, lower basic skills.
Right. The ACT says only about 1 in 4 students is academically prepared to succeed in college level courses.
Right.
So yes, and that goes all the way back to this collection of studies.
But
it also goes to the ethics of, are we really helping students by getting them into college? And we're going to have to deal with this as a society. And I have written about the question also about whether colleges might need to change, which has gone relatively unchallenged in terms of, for instance, the entry criterion of Algebra 2 proficiency. Does that have to be 100% the gatekeeper course?
as a validity matter. So you're raising really good issues.
I want to respect everyone's time. I said we would end promptly at 1:30. I want to thank Eric, Mariella,